Okay. I'd like to introduce Andy. Well, I think everybody knows Andy, don't they? It's not a matter of introducing him. So this talk is about trends and tips. Contesting at VHF has been a popular part of the hobby for many years and an area where things are always changing. This lecture is going to look at some of the techniques which have developed over the years, how you can take advantage of them to help you grow your score. The lecture will look at what's really needed in hardware and software to make them work for you. What a state-of-the-art contest setup looks like now, and perhaps debunk a few commonly held myths with some data. Okay. With respect to Andy, he's been wrapped up in radio contesting for over 40 years on HF and VHF, both as a single operator and as part of multi-operator teams. He's been lucky enough to have had a fair bit of success at both ends of the spectrum, and he's represented the UK in two World Radio Team Championships. Over the past few years, activity has been patchy due to the demands of a family, but he still tries to sneak in as much operating as he can. A penance for all this, he served 2 long shifts, separated by 10 years on the RSGB VHF Contest Committee, and is currently chair of that committee. So welcome, Andy, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the kind introduction, Dave. So good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see so many of you here. And a little bit about me. This is what I used to be. The antenna system that I got to on 2 meters, and then that was in times BC, before children. This is what I've been reduced to now, post. I threw this up actually during lockdown in COVID. It was up for about 6 months, and then the builders got the better of me, and they have to go up and down that bit there. So that's down as well. So I'm off 2 meters again right now. But life is moving. That was the picture in my garden a month or so ago. The digger in, and that's a hole. We know what that's a hole for. So hopefully later in the year, or next year I think now probably, that will get some concrete in and something on top of it. But while scouting the internet, I did run across somebody else who's got a bit more spare time on his hands at the moment, looking at a seemingly similar hole. So quite a good site actually as well. So maybe we'll see something from there. Anyway, what am I going to talk about in this presentation? So I'm going to tell you all the secrets of how to get a great score in contesting. And I'll tell you the secret now is that there aren't any secrets. Lots of people think there's a fantastic secret, they've got this special edge and so on that they've got, but I've come to the conclusion there are no secrets. It's just doing the right thing, doing it really well, and being in the right place to do it. I'm also unashamedly going to, I have scoured the internet for some of the more lunatic things that have been going on inside Europe to really look at what's happening at the most committed edge. That's probably the polite way to say it of VHF contesting, and what it takes to be at the top of the list. And then look at some ideas how you can take some of those and how they can help build your score. And I've done this unashamedly at looking at what the big guns have been doing, but people shouldn't take umbrage that they're not able to amass 9 antenna systems on top of a 1,000-meter hill, because lots of these things can be applied to much smaller stations. And I love contesting whether I'm running high power and big antennas, or whether I'm stuck at home running a watt and a bit of string and winkling stuff out the noise on 160. I don't care. It's the fascination, the delight of doing as much as you possibly can and doing better than you did last time. So, what is the secret? I said there wasn't one, but what is the most important success factor to doing well in contests? And Phil and Kirsty can sum that up really nicely. It is location, location, location. And I thought I'd just give you some examples of this. Those of you who attended John G4SWX's talk earlier would have seen him talk about heywhatsthat.com. Great minds think alike. So these are 3 East Coast sites that have had some noise out of them in history. On the left was my original site on a farm in Essex, And you can see the red is basically where you've got clear views of the horizon. You can see I've got some, some obstructions there, sort of between east and south. Actually look really good to the, once you've got round, from due south round to sort of southwest. The middle one is John, G4SWX's old site in Germany. Sorry, old site and a great site into Germany. It wasn't in Germany, he was just loud enough that it was in Germany. And then the third location is John's new remote station. It's also the site of M6T. And so I've operated a lot from the first site. I've operated quite a lot from the site on the right. And I know very well what the capabilities of that one in the middle are like, because I would sit and listen to John working stuff and call the same people. And in this direction here, down to the southeast, John was probably 10 dBs louder than me. Mine was a great site to the south, but he absolutely, stuffed me in that direction. And this site here on the right, this site, the new Joe 02 RF site, is even better. To give you an example, many of you remember SK7MW, big station in Sweden. In the Nordic activity contest, always workable from mine on Trapescata, 529, just about there. This site was bought by Bob, G4BAH, if you remember, the late Bob. And the first time we put an antenna up on that site for 2 meters, it was a 13-element crushcraft on a 30-foot tower, plugged it into a barefoot radio, no preamp or anything, and there was SK7MW S7. And sight makes a huge difference. But some caveats. This tool is just a guide. There's no doubt that John's site was not as poor as this might suggest out to the due east. It worked pretty well. The terrain data on here is not particularly accurate, and not having an apparently clear disaster clear horizon isn't a disaster. You can work lots of stuff, but if you really want to do well, you need a fantastic site with a great takeoff. So, in the words of the advert, what would you do for the best site? And what do you think the best site is? Well, this is a pretty good one. A trig point on top of a mountain. And this is S50C, who did the IARU. Some of you will have seen this stuff. You may have seen this. On top of 2,558 meter mountain, and what a location. Get four antenna systems and a station up there. And you look at a bit more detail, and you can see just quite how precarious that looks. So that's the you want a great site. That's the commitment that you need. And so when you've got a site like that, how do you get to it? Well, this is the only time that I've seen someone use a helicopter to fly a pile of kit into the site. I would say that was only some of the kit that they took up, because the rest of it, they're not shirkers, this lot. They're Sherpas, really. But they took the rest of the kit up on their back, on their backs up that hill, and you can see what the terrain's like. It's 4.5 hour walk up from the bottom, and then after the contest, they brought it all down by hand as well, and that was 2 trips. So come down after the contest in the dark, have some kip, walk up the next day again, and come back down. And you've got pictures, you can see them well loaded. You've got pictures of the folks with 2.2 kVA Honda generators on their backpacks coming down. So these boys really, it's called commitment. That's what you need to be successful there. And what does that commitment deliver to you? Well, it delivers you lots of fantastic QSLs. I mean, that's a brilliant map of coverage, isn't it? You'd think they would have done awesomely well in that contest. And then you go to the results, and you look and you think, my goodness me, they came in 10th. Now, to be fair, I had a quick look back at our results for that year, and quite interesting. You look at the top there, SN7L, DA0FF, OL7C, DL0GTH, all stations in the centre of Europe. Best DX into the UK, and actually you look in our logs, and SN7L was best DX for lots of people. So actually there were good conditions, from that central Europe bit. I think these guys are a bit unlucky. They're a bit out of the propagation. But interesting to look at the overall results. And there's quite there's more stuff we can learn from this table. Accuracy is interesting. Accuracy is important. People are losing, the good guys are losing 2 to 3% of their score. The folks who could use more work are losing a bit more from their score. So you can easily make 5% of difference to your score just by making sure that you are accurate in what you log. And I would say VHF is pretty generous. There's no penalties applied for logging a bad QSO. At some of the HF contests, things like CQ Worldwide, you log a bad QSO, you get a penalty of 3 times that applied to your score, and it really I think it's great actually, because I think it really drives a commitment to accurate logging. The other interesting thing is just to have a look at the equipment table, which is always entertaining. And I think, one of the things that you'll see there, and something that's become common over the past 20 years probably, is the use of multiple antenna systems. And I'm not, Olwyn did a great job of talking about some of this earlier, so I'm going to go over this quite quickly. But SN7L, 4 systems, DA0FF, I think that's 8, OL7C, 5 or 6 systems. Interesting power level as well in OL7C as well. Their power level is clearly, I presume this is just a list of licensed powers. I'm entertained to see F8 KGU is 120 watts. It appeared to be quite a common power level for France. So, to be taken with a pinch of salt, I'm sure. But, lots of folks with multiple antenna systems there, and that's a big key to doing well. And I'll just, touch on that. So why does that work? So here's, a pattern of a notional, fairly rubbish antenna from, one of my locations. Covers, an area, and if you just took your 400 watts and split it 2 ways. So the coverage from that antenna shrinks a little bit because you've lost a bit of coverage, but you've added a second direction. And overall, you're covering more area with those 2 than you were covering with the one. Because the point is, VHF contesting, you make QSOs when you're both pointing in the right direction, when there's an aircraft in the right place, when you tune to the right frequency, when you're calling CQ and there's no one else QRM over the top of it. And it's quite a random event that you've got to hit. And so you need to maximize the amount of time that you're in a position that someone can hear you. So maximum coverage is really, really important. And then a third system on the back of that, same argument. And how do you make this at the very, very simplest level? Transmitter, amplifier. In the transmit position, you split that power between the 2 antennas. In the receive position, you could perhaps switch between them. I use a foot switch to switch between the antennas. So I listen on one antenna in one direction, stamp the foot switch, listen to the other one. There are lots of other ways of doing this. And you can grow this by having more antenna systems. You can grow it by having multiple amplifiers if your single amplifier can't deliver 400 watts or whatever your UK, your licensed power is. You can get to the position where you have multiple transceivers and receivers, so you have more than one operator listening at the same time, perhaps to different directions. And you can make the switching more and more complex, so actually you can listen to more than one antenna at once. Perhaps you've got one in one ear and one in the other, and this switching matrix can become a real complicated multi-legged octopus if you're not careful. But there's one thing that you should remember, and from the words of Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams. And what I mean by that is make sure that your individual antennas are pointing in different directions, because you can have this situation, that's fine, 2 antennas not really overlapping, wherever they're pointing. If you start to bring them so they're overlapping, this area in here, coverage from both antennas, you might think, fantastic, I've got the gain of both antennas and I've got the power of both, into both, and it'll work better. Well, it might, or it might cancel beautifully between the two, because actually, by the time you've got those antennas up in the air and on different masts in different places, you haven't a Scooby-Doo what the phase relationship is between those 2 antennas. So it's very easy to get cancellation in that environment. And at HF, I used to set up our, we used to do this on 15 meter stack, and because the switching, it wasn't all done at the top of the masthead. And I'd actually, put a remote station out, listen to the signal, adjust the coax lengths to get that null, and then add another half wave in there to make it work. And this stuff is real. You do get cancellation, so don't do that. And how do you arrange these things? So that's a very neat picture from G8T down in Sheppey, beautifully done. 3 separate towers, 2 pairs, and a nice stack of 6 short Yargies, probably pointing inland. All the stuff Olwyn spoke about earlier on. You can have a single antenna, single support to do this. So this is how I did it. I had a box of 4 Yargies, a rotator at that point there, 4 Yargies stacked vertically above that. So essentially you had a rotator that offset you from the main direction of the antennas, and then another pair of 9s that were hung down the side of the tower and could turn through about 90 degrees. So that would cover the UK. That was usually pointing at Germany, and the top 4 were usually pointing at France. And that's the model. I would say that was my September contest setup. That is guide. It's probably reasonably solid, but you couldn't leave it up there all the time. I did used to leave 2 9s on the top all the time. I did have 3 for a while. Hint, 3 on the top of a KR400 is beyond its capabilities when the wind blows. And then, you take it to extremes. So single tower, this is the DR9A thing that Olwyn showed earlier on. 8 stacks of 4x6 pointing essentially, all around the compass. So they've got complete coverage. That's what they had this year. In previous years, they've even had a box of 4 long Yargies stuck on the top of that, as well as a sort of, laser beam as well, a bit more gain, point it in the right direction. They didn't have that this year. Too much effort to set up. Sadly, these boys had a disaster with that tower in the October contest, and it crashed to the ground. Because that, by the way, is on a 1965 truck out the back of it. It's fantastic. So I thoroughly recommend you go and look at DR9A's Facebook page and the video on YouTube about this, because it's great. It's great stuff to see what they're doing. Similarly, much more traditionally, HB9DUR, JN36GU. We've all heard big signals from 36GU. I mean, 8 systems up on top of on top of there. OE1W this year were quite interesting. They had 8 systems as well. I haven't got all of them. Interestingly, stack of 4 big wheels there in the middle. I presume that was for receive, so you can have a listen all around. But I thought this was rather cool. That's actually a 12 high stack of antennas there. So they've got 8 4s, and then above that something like 4 10s pointing back the other way. So awesome, really good. And this stuff isn't new. This goes back to September 2000, IK2CFR3 on top of Marmalada, 3,300 meters above sea level on the top of a ski lift. 8 systems there. I remember that contest. They were audible at my place. I could hear them. I couldn't work them because they were sat underneath some ON station who was 30 over 9 and 30 wide. But audible up in this, and they had a little help as well. The Italian, the Italian 300 watts is always good. So the question comes: when you have all that hardware, how do you make sure that you use it properly? Because it's tough stuff, and I think the answer is pretty simple, really. Sadly, that's not a feature that I have. So, what can a human really do? And the reality is, listen on one antenna. When the signals are weak, you want to listen on one antenna at a time. You might manage to listen on 2, one in one ear, one in the other. But if you just take the RF out of two antennas, combine, or more than 2 antennas, and combine them together, all you're going to do is combine lots of noise and QRM. You need to switch. This was something that I tried. It's a rather lousy photo. I tried in one May 70 centimeter contest. So you see a box of 4 2-meter Yargies and then 4 stacked 26s on 70s with a rotator in the middle. And I thought, well, it'll be interesting. Maybe I can spend some time, turn the top ones around, and I'll lose 3 dB and it'll all work beautifully. Well, the answer was it didn't. I still don't really understand why, but it felt like I lost about 9 dB when I turned the things around. It just, it just didn't work. I can sort of see the reason for 6, but absolute disaster. So you need to switch and not try and combine things, things together. When you've got lots of operators, multiple transceivers, and making use of multiple operators is important. So more than one person listening at the time. If you go and look at that DR9A video, you'll see they have 2 operators sitting side by side, and they've each got switches that allow them to essentially switch around and listen to antennas. It seems like some of them are listening to perhaps 4, and the other one's listening to another 4. And then either one of them can grab the transmitter. And so they'll just switch between them, and you've got people listening carefully enough at the individual antennas to copy the calls first time. So, quite a clever mechanism for making that work. Another thing, when things are quiet, you can be running on the band, and another operator can be off tuning around, looking for other QSOs on search and pounce. So looking for QSOs that you need on the band. And then that led me to think, could you do what's called full in-band or full SO2R on 2 meters? So at HF, big trend in multi-operator contesting is now that you have 2 stations on a band. The second station has got antennas that are far enough away from the main antenna that they can listen while the main station is transmitting. So I do that. For those of you who've seen me in the 80-meter club call contest, I do that on 80 meters. I can get within about kilohertz of my transmit frequency. Works fine. We do it on HF, at M6T with big stations. Can you do that at 2 meters? And it's quite, we've often said about RF engineering, everyone cites HF's really hard. You need a really great receiver to work on HF. Well, it's much harder at VHF because the noise floor is much lower, and the signal strengths are much higher, and the dynamic ranges required are much worse. But I started to do a fag packet calculation on this just to see what it looked like. We'll assume 400 watts transmit power. Say your transmit antennas for 3 wavelength antennas, 21 dB a gain, and we'll assume that you've managed to locate your receive antenna 100 meters away, not in the main lobe of the transmit antennas, because that would be silly. So it's off the back somewhere. So you've got 25 dB of isolation at your transmit antenna. 100 meter antenna spacing gives you 55 dB of isolation. And then your single receive antenna for the second radio is, we've assumed you picked a good antenna with low side lobes for that. So perhaps you get 30 dB of side lobe suppression on there. And I came down to saying that gets you about neg 17 dBm into the receiver. Noise floor for a 2 dB noise figure receiver is about neg 138. So you need 121 dB of dynamic range. Now, today Alwyn talked about dynamic range and said, 100 dB is about the state of the art for pure dynamic range, and that's absolutely true. But if you've only got one big signal in the band, I think more important than two-tone dynamic range is blocking dynamic range. So it's the point at which your receiver starts to fall over. And you've got HF transceivers out there now that have got 150 dB of dynamic blocking dynamic range. And so that starts to feel an achievable number. You need really good transmit and receive phase noise performance as well, probably a bit better than comes out of the box. But there are some interesting techniques being used to get around some of this. So firstly, quite a lot of the big stations are tending to use 14 megs for their transverter IFs rather than 28, because a lot of HF transceivers have got slightly better performance at 14. But what you are seeing is you're seeing some of the big guys, and I think people like SN7L have been doing this for a long while. I mean, SN7L say, we've got 30 stations running 2 kilowatts plus within our first Fresnel zone of our antennas. So huge antenna. And they're running, I believe, and others are running crystal filters inside, either at 2 meters or in the IF, to really brick wall their bit of the band and make sure that those huge signals are not crushing them further out. And if you start to do that in both the transmit and the receive path, you can start to see how you can get to the position to do SO2R or real in-band operation on 2 meters. I'm not sure it'll gain you what it gains you at HF, But it's quite an interesting thought. I think there are probably people doing this. I haven't got any. In fact, I'm sure I read someone was doing it, but it's not something that, you know, perhaps this is one of the secrets that people aren't talking about at the minute. But definitely an edge. So, little thought on equipment. What equipment do you need to do well? And I think, firstly, I want to say any antenna is better than no antenna. Getting on the radio, making some QSOs. I mean, again, if you saw John's talk earlier on, he showed the classic curve of or straight line of antenna length versus gain, and basically for any length is about a dB a difference between a great antenna and a lousy antenna. It's not gonna kill you. Equally, any radio getting on is better than no radio. So don't feel that that you can't get on if your radio is not perfect, unless you're going to be very loud with other people. And this is the point Olwyn made, because if you're somewhere in a built-up area and you're only any degree of power, and you've got a radio that's got lots of broadband transmit noise, you're going to be really, really unpopular with your neighbours. So that's when you need great radios. But if you're somewhere out the way, not many people around, nobody very loud with you, doesn't really matter what you're going to use for that level. So, but if you're really, your big station, what's important in radios? And for me, RF performance is the important thing. I don't care if the thing's got 87 buttons and a special color LCD display and makes the T for you. And that might be quite useful, but actually a high RF performance is the most important thing. Some people tell me band scopes are great. I've yet to use one where I thought it's actually helped me. It might be different when the band's quiet and you're looking for things popping out the noise, but I find them I don't find them useful. You need a receiver that's got enough sensitivity, and again, I think the conversation that Olwyn said earlier on, if you build the station appropriately, you probably don't need a preamp on 2 meters, or you put the front, the first stage of your transverter right at the masthead. Great phase noise, and for me, high blocking dynamic range, and that means not a direct sampling receiver for that. So it means a super het receiver. So it means, not an IC 7610. It means an FTDX10 or a K3 or a TS890 or something, something like that. And you need a clean transmitter as well. So, really low phase noise and broadband transmitter noise, so you don't upset your neighbours. And indeed, if you're doing in-band, you don't upset yourself. Really good high order transmitter IMD performance. We often quote third order IMD for transmitters. Actually, it's the high order numbers that make the big difference for how you occupy the band. The K3 has not got great third order numbers, but its high order numbers are good, and actually you can work really closely in band with that. And and your amplifier, don't run it at full power. It's not well, they're sold to be run flat out, but certainly, lots of the solid-state amplifiers are not clean when they're run at anywhere near saturated power. Olwyn's guide was 70% of the 1 dB compression point, so that's probably 50 to 70% of the rated transmit power. Because 1200 watt amplifier is probably a 900 watt 1 dB compression point, and somewhere in that ballpark. Antennas, again, much as Olwyn said earlier, I mean, firstly, have as many and be as diverse in direction as you can, you can possibly manage. I hear people worry about SWR. I've got 30 dB return loss on this antenna. Well, it doesn't matter. If you've got a stack, they need to be pretty similar. Otherwise, you'll lose performance. But it's not, it's not the most important parameter. And modern antennas are not magic. You are not going to double your contest score in most circumstances by going from your 1970s MBS Yagi to the latest LFA. If you have a quiet site, actually your score, and you've got a single antenna, your score will probably be better with some awful old antenna, because you'll send power in all sorts of directions. We used to do field day with a single antenna. We used to use this old Crushcraft 4218, old MBS design. Worked fine. I thought, fantastic! I've got this I've got this 8 wavelength M squared we're going to take and use, and our score went down. And it went down not because of where you were pointing. The 3 dB extra was fine. It's the 10 to 15 dB reduction in all the side loads off the back that killed the score. So But the caveat, and it's a huge caveat now, given the state of the environment and the state of the amount of noisy stuff that's out there. If you've got noise and you've got QRM laid in sight, a modern antenna with low side lobes is really, really important to reduce that noise floor. So there's horses and coursers for that, for this thing. And clearly, as a given, use good quality feeder. We then move on to what other tools help in contesting, and this is here's our Marmite ON4 KST and aircraft, well, Air Scout and so on. I mean KST particularly. I'd say about aircraft scatter. As I said earlier, I've been, I had a big period of activity, and then kids came, and I, came back 15 years later and did a bit. And the thing that surprised me, I think, was the huge adoption of Air Scout for looking at aircraft scatter. And to me, back when I was really active, aircraft scatter was the mode we didn't know we had. It wasn't well recognised. You'd be on the band, you'd be thinking you're working stuff at troposcatter, and I was thinking, I know all those folks are out there, it's at night, why do things get so much quieter? I just don't, I don't get it. Actually, we all know the answer to that now, there aren't so many planes. But, aircraft scatter and setting up long-range QSOs over that and integrate, and you need to have, all this alignment stuff I spoke about, be on the right frequency, be pointing in the right direction, be looking, you need to join that stuff up. So you need to use KST or a communications medium like that to join those together. WTKST is a great tool for joining, joining those two things together. And there's a good, Ian GM3 SEK's got a nice setup guide for doing that stuff. And then I asked myself the question that said, actually, how much difference does this make to a score? Because there's been lots of theory. It's enormous. It's very little. So I thought, well, let's go and look at some data. So I took, for the September 2021 IARU contest, I took the KST logs, and I took our open logs and 3 German logs as well in there, and said, if there's been a conversation on KST, and if the if there's a QSO between those two partners in the log, let's call that a success. And so up there at the top, DA0FF, DR9A, very active on KST in the contest. Their strategy is if someone pops up on KST, have a go with them. And they made between about 10 to 11% of their QSOs were appear to have been set up on KST. What impact does that have on the score? Well, some of those QSOs would have happened anyway, because some people ask for stupid QSOs on KST. Ones that you could just tune by having half a brain and turning the big dial in the middle of your radio. But of course, on the other hand, some of those are much longer than the average QSO distance. So I haven't done the calculation, only because it would take me an hour to write the extra stuff into Excel to do it. But I suspect the score improvement is about the same. DR1H was the top single op, so he was only 2%. So clearly, having difficulty, multiple hands there. In the UK, G3M, 5%, G8T, 3%, G0 VHF Portable, 6%. So a bit less. Standout, Mr. Cornby, 23%. John's very good at juggling that. He also only made 250 QSOs, so a bit different. It was probably focusing on DX. But I thought that was quite an interesting analysis. The number was bigger than I expected. And I think it'll be interesting to repeat that analysis for other contests. That was 2 meters. That was the September 2 meter contest. The other thing that has been it's started to be a big thing at HF has been real-time scoreboard. So you set your logging software up to report the score into this real-time scoring server, and everyone can have a look and see how you're doing against your competition in real time. And it's really cool. This is a VHF version of that, nothing like as well adopted. But you can see some people starting, this was the UHF contest actually. But I've done this, and it is quite motivating actually, because you go on and you think, right, I'm going to get myself to the top of the list. And it does. It helps motivate you. It helps keep focus. So I think this is a really interesting tool. It's supported in quite a lot of logging packages, and certainly you need this server infrastructure behind it to give it. But the Slovenian folks have got that there for the big contests. So I think this could be quite an interesting thing. And most of the teams who are doing it like it. What you're starting to see at HF now is you're seeing complaints about, well, we were all on, but this team wasn't and that team wasn't, and so we, at M6T, I think we'll be having a debate about whether we're going to do it this year. I'm quite keen for it, but and then finally operating. So just and this is just some of the things I think was worth thinking about. This is. Contesting is a skill. You have to learn to do lots of things, and increasingly you have to do more and more. People think KST and Air Scout, they're just cheating, isn't it? Well, no, it's not. It's another set of tools that you need to learn to juggle, and so you need to learn to watch the cluster. You need to learn to watch Air Scout. You need to watch KST. You need to use that second VFO or the second receiver, your second operator, effectively, to make sure you're continually scanning the band for things that you need. I think another really important thing I just call out to people is don't waste time when you're operating, even if the rate is slow. Hello, John, nice to meet you. Yeah, it's fantastic. We're having a great contest, Yeah, I don't understand why anyone's calling me. Those are the QSOs that I hear as I'm tuning the band and looking, going search and pouch, and I want to work them. And if that takes more than 10 seconds, I go on to the next one. You need to spend as much time as you possibly can calling CQ so that you have the maximum chance to people to find you. So, wasting time, the number of folks who think their rate is lousy, and so it doesn't matter. They're throwing QSOs away. And I should say the other thing, particularly when you've got aircraft scatter and so on, if you make that QSO, it's quite likely there will be other people in that area who are hearing your signals as a result of that aircraft being in the right place. So you quite often get little clutches of QSOs that come together because it's via aircraft scattering. You don't want to miss those opportunities. Be accurate. Spoke about that area earlier. That can make a significant difference to your score. And I think also, do you speak a foreign language? It can be helpful. It helps to attract some of the more casual folks on the band. If you look at that DR9A video, you'll watch the operator seamlessly slipping between German and English and French and Italian, just one by one. And I believe that is a helpful thing to do. If you listen to if you used to listen to me, my German is awful. I can probably just about get away with it. My French is passable, but I think it does help to wheedle them out. And I think the last thing I'd say on operating is winners never quit and quitters never win. And really that's about saying, even if it's going badly, don't give up. Don't say, oh, disaster. Think about what you can do to keep going. If you lose an antenna system, rip it out and carry on with what you've got. If you lose an amplifier, carry on making QSOs. The number of times I have won or lost a contest by a gnat is, they're probably the most memorable ones, but frequent. And sitting in that chair and making contacts is the most important thing to success. If you're not in the chair, if you're not calling CQ, if you're not making contacts, if you're not doing something actively, you're not adding to your score. And then really, just some final thoughts from me. I think, any antenna is better than no antenna. So, whatever you've got, if you can't reach those heights of what we've seen here today, it doesn't matter. Come on and have fun with what's around. Any radio is better than no radio. Caveat. Some time is better than no time. As Dave said in my introduction, I will the amount of spare time I have for radio now is shocking. But I will always try and sneak away and get and make a few QSOs in the contest if I can. So just get on the radio, have fun, and learn, because a lot of this stuff you only get through the process of learning and being on the band and knowing what's about. And that's all I had to say. So I'm very happy to take brickbats. Thank you.
Questions? Who's first? I saw this hand first.
If you had two antennas and two receivers, pointed in the same direction, would you combine an RF and listen in mono, or would you stick one in each ear and
No,
combine in your head?
I would stick one in each ear, absolutely. Yeah, for that purpose, if you haven't a clue what the phase relationship is, and you're just combining noise. So I'd have one in each ear and have the ability to switch to just one.
Another one down here first, yeah. Okay.
Always going to ask me a difficult question now. So.
This is where I get exercise.
It's about SO2R.
Ah.
So first of all, from my little reading of the rules, you're a man for the rules.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
So what are people allowed to do under the rules in summary? So if you could do it technically, it's fine.
Yeah.
Great, that's good to know.
But if you can do it technically and it's not disallowed in the rules, it's allowed.
That's fine.
Yeah.
And it's not disallowed in the rules because maybe I didn't read them carefully.
SO2R is absolutely allowed. I mean, the most important thing about SO2R is you can't have two transmit signals on the band at a time. So
Okay.
if you're doing, any SO2R model, you're only transmitting in one place at a time. You might be interleaving those things. They can't be on the same band, but you can. Yeah. Yeah.
So you've got the 1 kilometre or whatever it was radius for VHF NFD, but I don't see it in the general rules. Is it in the general rules?
I don't know.
So you know, in principle, you can receive all over the place.
Okay,
I
excellent.
think, but just a thought. But the other one I want to say was your calculation.
Probably
Although
wrong.
the side lobes are good, in practice, is it the side lobes that will be the problem, or actually all the scatter off everything that's around you? I mean, you can't get down really low. I think it's hard.
I
think it's hard.
I agree.
If you're going to have your antennas 100 meters away.
I suspect it's hard as well. I mean, that was I would say I have not done that. It was a fag packet, and I suspect it's tricky as well. But at HF, I mean, genuinely. So. No, in band, not at all. So on 40 meters, let's just say plenty of power, 3-element Yagi at 100 feet. So you certainly, and I can receive in band on a beverage 100 meters away, without any extra filtering other than just the K3s, 5 kilohertz away. So the new radios have made it so much. There's a transformation between the difference between using a pair of MPs and using a pair of K3s is night and day in that environment. It's quite interesting. But I agree, it's really challenging. I suspect crystal filters is the way to do it and be in a different bit of the band. But, yeah.
Yeah, it's not really a question. It's just a comment. Tim M0AFJ, operate from near Redruth in Cornwall, and just typically looking at the maps that you put up, everyth's to the east.
Yes.
Remember, there's 3 or 4 of us now who've put together fairly good stations to try and make ourselves heard. First things, we don't hear the QRM that you guys have got. We try and position ourselves on the band to be out the way. From my place to work the East Coast is 600 kilometres. That's a fair distance into Germany for you guys. So just remember that we are there, and we're there on the main bands.
I completely agree, and I think that's actually why multiple antenna systems is so important, because it lets you keep an antenna, an antenna on the UK all the time. I mean, ultimately, what you'll do with to win a contest is you'll figure out what you need to do to optimize your score. And as you go, 3 systems means you can keep an antenna on the UK all the time. 2 systems, you'd probably, you'll be splitting one of those between France and the UK. And absolutely, it is, yeah.
What I really notice is actually IO93, IO94, and 8384 from Cornwall. Yeah. Very rarely do we hear signals from that area.
Yeah.
Because they're beaming down to London or into Europe.
Yeah. Yeah. I understand. I understand, and you can see why that happens. Hey, Jonathan.
Hi, Andy, and G0 DVJ, Jonathan. Interesting as ever. I really one for the adjudicator sort of aspect of things, really. Would it with the online sort of checkboxes and things that are available when you submit a log nowadays be easy to get people to to check the box whether they're using two radios or KST. I notice you're very good at saying 2 times K3 when you're using 2 radios, but not everybody does. Just from a point of view of trying to learn from the results, because I look down there, I want to compare what I'm doing with what other people have done.
Yeah.
And it's very difficult if you don't know they're using it, or you don't know that, because if you're not using it, you don't know, right? And if you don't know they're using SO2R, if you don't know they're using, I'm not talking about every option that you could possibly have, not what radios you're using, but just these general categories that can make a difference, as you said, in terms of percentages of scores. It'd be really useful to be able to compare your own score with people doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting thought. Maybe in the claim score bit. Oh God, Pete, because I can see Pete shrinking in his seat as I suggest these things. But yes, I think the assisted and unassisted bit, all the KST, not KST. It's an interesting set of questions. I think HF. My observation in the 80-meter CCs where I don't think there's where SO2R is being used, I don't think there's anyone not listing there who's doing it that I'm aware of. But then I might just not know.
Andy, can I disagree with you about the use of a spectrum scope?
Of course you can.
So on the lighter bands, like 70 SEMS, they're really great for finding out who your competition is, just QS wide to work, and then you go straight in because they're beaming towards the UK.
That's a good call. That's a good call. I think the challenge of spectrum scopes is being able to see the wood for the trees. And that probably, and that's an interesting model. That's an interesting thought. I hadn't thought of that. Try that.
I'm sorry. One last question. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to.
You know
draw
where
to a
I am. I'll
close.
be here.
Does that mean I only have one question? Okay, this is a hangover from a question asked Alwyn. I'm using an IC 9700 from a home location that's in a bit of a dip. I operate on 2 meters and 70 SEMS. I realise my 2 meter performance is probably within the code of practice. The 70 SEMS performance will not be if it's to spec. I'm just concerned that I had thoughts about putting an amplifier on to give 400 watts, but I'd be non-compliant. Would I get disqualified for doing that from my home location?
So,
And if so, is it possible for you to sort of clarify the rules a bit so we understand? Thanks.
yeah, that's fine. So it's a code of practice. It's not rules. And the way we deal with poor signals is, if someone's got a poor signal and they're causing interference and we can verify the complaints, then they'll have a penalty applied to their, to the score, and I think that penalty probably increases for multiple offences and so on. So we won't disqualify anyone for not meeting the code of practice. I don't want everybody with an IC 9700 not to come on the band. I mean, it'd be a very dull contest in that, in that situation. But I do want people who are, in locations. Ultimately, I want people to work together to fix the strong signal problems. I mean, that's the way these things usually, get resolved most effectively. People just have to work together. It's been a problem in VHF contests for as long as I've been doing them. I expect people to work together to fix that problem. If they don't and they're being difficult, they'll get a penalty applied to their score, and perhaps that'll persuade them.
Thanks very much. I'm sure we could go on for hours asking questions, but unfortunately we've got to draw it to a close because the next lecture starts at 5 o'clock. So thank you very much for your questions. Thanks, Andy,
You're welcome.
for a fantastic talk.